thing we know is that the name hamburger comes from hamburger steak, which is basically just a blob of ground beef. And they called this a hamburger, not because it was made of ham, but because it was associated with Hamburg, which was a city in northern Germany. The late 19th century was an era of massive German immigration to the US, and because Hamburg was Germany's leading port city of the time, most of the Germans who came to the US arrived on ships from Hamburg, and accordingly, hamburger became an adjective associated with German Americans in general. Like many other immigrant groups from Europe, German Americans often took up jobs as cooks and restaurant owners, where they served up the same sorts of foods they had cooked back home, and hamburger-style steak is usually believed to be an Americanized version of some sort of ground beef-based dish that was well liked in 19th century Germany, like Met or Labskaus or Frikandellen. People tend to be very married to this idea that immigrants import foods from their native lands completely unchanged into America. But in my experience researching these kinds of things, a lot of times immigrants don't really import a dish as much as they just cook whatever ingredients they have access to in America in a style vaguely similar to how they did things back home. This whole idea of dishes having these very precise and specific and universally agreed upon definitions isn't really how people thought about food in the 19th century, which is the whole reason things with vague names like hamburger-style steak even existed in the first place. Anyway, the rise of hamburger steaks overlapped with the rise of sandwich culture, so it was perhaps inevitable that someone would inevitably make a hamburger steak sandwich at some point. The idea was so obvious, in fact, that the book says there are at least a half dozen cities, restaurants, and families in America that all claim to have birthed our modern-day hamburger-style sandwich sometime around the dawn of the last century. But JJ, I'm sure you are thinking, we eat sandwiches on bread and burgers are on buns, so what's the deal with that? Well, for starters, that is not strictly true. I'm sure you can think of lots of sandwiches that you've eaten on buns over the years, including ones made on that other fine German import, the Kaiser roll. But the book gives credit to a guy called J. Walter Anderson for being the founding father of mainstreaming the idea of making hamburger sandwiches with buns instead of slices of bread. At his restaurant, Walter prided himself on selling nice, greasy patties, which I guess was not terribly concerning to people in those less health-conscious days. And in order to absorb all of those juices, the meat was always served between two nice, fluffy, freshly baked buns. Old Walter was from Kansas, and his first restaurant was in Wichita, and his burgers proved so popular that throughout the 1920s, he opened a bunch of other restaurants all across the Midwest, making him the founder of America's first full-fledged hamburger chain, a little franchise known as White Castle. White Castle is considered a mostly smaller player in American burger culture today, but as the first chain on the block, they were super influential for a time. Many of America's earliest copycat burger chains, for instance, all used the word white in their names as well, which was interesting for me to learn as it finally explained why one of the leading burger chains here in Vancouver is called White Spot. But more importantly, as White Castle style hamburger sandwiches with the fluffy buns became the most famous kind in America, the many other hamburger chains that popped up everywhere across the country after World War II all copied this style that was by then a proven hit with customers. Now, early fast food hamburgers were pretty unimpressive by today's standards. They were small and didn't have any toppings beyond like onions and mustard and pickles, and often looked pretty bland and unappetizing in these ads. Cheese started to become popular around the 1930s, with people starting to use the phrase cheeseburger for the first time. And this marked an important symbolic moment in the evolution of the food, since it represented the culture starting to conceptualize a burger as a distinct food rather than simply a delivery system for a hamburger-style steak. Additional toppings became common in the 60s and 70s as the fast food industry became more competitive and companies tried to make their burgers stand out from the crowd. The A&W Corporation claims credit for serving the first bacon burger in 1963, and in time, other places would start adding stuff like fresh tomatoes and lettuce and barbecue sauce and mushrooms and fried eggs and all the rest of it. And once you add enough toppings, burgers start to seem more like a proper dinner and then find their way into higher-end sit-down restaurants rather than just diners, drive-ins, and dives. Now, another one of the great burger innovations was, of course, chicken burgers, which started to be a thing in the 1970s. Though here in the 21st century, chicken is by far the most popular meat in America, eaten about as much as beef and pork combined. This is a relatively recent development. Chicken used to be regarded as a somewhat fancy or unusual meat, similar to how we regard most other bird meats today. And it wasn't until the late 70s that it started to slowly dominate American meat consumption. And why was this? Well, a lot of it was as much an anti-beef thing as it was a pro-chicken thing. The late 70s saw the rise of a lot of new thinking when it came to the intersection of diet and health, encouraged by some of the leading scientific research of the time. And much of this pointed in the direction of beef bad, chicken good. Red meat was high in fat and calories and linked to heart attacks, they said, so stop eating so much of it. Try some chicken instead. And this freaked out the burger industry, who feared losing customers to their big rivals over there in the fried chicken industry. And that is more or less why everyone serves chicken burgers now. But one enterprising fast food chain went even further, a little place called McDonald's. Perhaps you've heard of them. The head of McDonald's, the ever savvy and creative Ray Kroc, wanted his company to dominate the chicken scene in some novel way. So he got the company's executive chef, René Arend, a man who is almost certainly the most influential Luxembourgian immigrant in US history, given he was responsible for so many big McDonald's things. And Ray Kroc tasked him to come up with something clever to do with chicken. And René came up with chicken nuggets, based on onion nuggets, which were apparently a popular fast food thing at the time. And can you guess the year that these chicken nuggets were officially added to the McDonald's menu? 1983. 1 year before I was born. That's pretty shockingly recent, eh? Apparently, it's because breading and frying pieces of meat this small is quite hard to do at a large scale. So McDonald's had to spend several years developing a whole new industrial process from scratch to mass produce these things. But developed it was, and as someone who grew up in the 1980s, it is quite remarkable to reflect on just how swiftly this product conquered the American foodscape, not just in terms of all of the knockoff McNuggets that soon appeared at all of the other fast food chains, but also via the frozen generic chicken nuggets and strips and tenders that quickly became a ubiquitous sight in supermarket freezers across the continent. These days, of course, chicken nuggets have become such a familiar symbol of low-effort, middle-class cooking that they've become this whole meme thing, with all these jokes about the stereotypically spoiled white middle-class kid demanding his mother make him chicken tendies for every meal.
Myself and my clan on World of Warcraft are about to start a raid of sorts. Seeing how you're up and all, I was thinking mayhaps you could rustle me up some of your famous tendies.
The other big innovation that Chef René brought to the world was his idea of a stable but varied set of dipping sauces for the nuggets. I had always assumed that there had been a bit of trial and error market research with this, but not really. From day one, he just decreed that there shall be 4 dipping sauces: barbecue, sweet and sour, hot mustard, and honey. And these all represented sauces that had become pretty familiar to Americans by the 1980s, with barbecue, based on the tangy tomato sauce that had become a staple of US barbecue culture, while sweet and sour was based on a type of apricot sauce often used in American Chinese restaurants. Hot mustard, however, was eventually displaced by honey mustard, I guess reflecting the American love of honey. I actually didn't realize that raw honey itself remains a dipping sauce you can get at McDonald's. Do you know anybody that puts plain honey on their nugs? Alrighty, and lastly, let us talk about fries. If nuggets have one clear inventor and hamburgers can claim multiple inventors, fries exist in a third category of something closer to a true folk food that evolved gradually and without much deliberate planning. Potatoes are native to South America, and are one of the many New World foods that the early Spanish explorers brought back to Europe. The various European countries then integrated potatoes into their national cuisines in various ways, including by frying them in animal fat. Fried